Recording in progress.
So today is December 29th, the last Sunday of 2024. It happens to be a fifth Sunday. The fifth Sundays come around for, it looked to me like in some cases 5 times a year, fifth days of the week. It's an anomaly of the Gregorian calendar, this calendar that we use. And often we'll take a fifth Thursday off, for instance, on the reading group. So everybody has a little break, and then Thursday evening 1 through 4. In terms of the master class, it's going to be every evening, including fifth. And some of those can be used for training. So the master class will, the first Thursday night, I'm sorry, not the master class, the evening sit. First Thursday night will focus on the posture, details of the posture. The next week will focus on the breath. The third week will focus on the attention. The fourth week will focus on walking meditation. And the fifth week will focus on using the stick, correct posture, striking with the stick. So the fifth Thursday would be a special training opportunity for people on the formal path here. So it worked out to be a pretty clean structure, and been working on it for a couple of months, and I think it's pretty well refined. We will be piggybacking the master class on the Just Sit Saturday. Just Sit Saturday goes from 9 to noon, and then the master class starts at 1 and goes to 5. So 9 to noon, I think, is 4 hours, right? Oh, 3 hours.
Yeah.
6. And the afternoon is 1 to 5, which is 4 hours. So hopefully these will be easy to remember. So let me introduce this idea of Hossen Dharma combat, Mondo, crossing of swords. It's not really combat, it's trying to get at the great matter, as it's called, the great matter of life and death, existence, the teachings of Buddha Dharma. And it evolved someplace in China, as I understand. There was a monk or senior teacher who had 5,000 plus or minus monks and nuns living at the monastery where he resided. So they had to figure out a way to expose this teacher to all of the, by the way, does that fan interfere with what we're doing? John, can you hear the fan? Is it a distraction?
I don't hear the fan.
Okay, good. Somebody complained about that, Randy, I think. We could shut it off, but we don't have to. So they had to figure out a way to expose everybody to the senior guiding teacher's Dharma or teaching of his interpretation. So they set him out on a platform, a dais, a raised platform out in the open. And they were apparently up in the mountains someplace, probably a valley. They typically built the monasteries facing south on the side of a mountain. So you can picture this pastoral setting, and he would sit up on the platform, and all the others would gather around to listen. Kind of like a stadium effect, I would guess. You know, our football stadium is like 50,000, right? So this would be a small stadium. And each person would step up and raise a question, a challenging question, either challenging to them or challenging the teacher. Then there's the teacher would respond, and he'd come back if not clear, and the teacher would respond again. So a short dialogue, but it could go back and forth several times until finally the person stepping forward, monk or nun, was satisfied with the teaching and would bow and step back, and then somebody else would step up. Apparently, there's a scribe sitting there writing all this down as it goes, because this is where many of the anecdotes of teacher-student exchanges came from throughout history. And those became, later, they became what we call koans, public cases, because this is doing like dokusan in public dokusan. The monks and nuns lived together full time, so their confession and repentance apparently was very literal. They would literally confess to something they did, they screwed up. They would do this once a month in a kind of a public forum. And so this was a way of making the dokusan, which is usually held somewhat private, not we're obsessive about privacy, by comparison, I think. But like in Rujing's time, Nyojo was Master Dogen's teacher. That was around 13th century, and the way they describe his Hasen, or his Dokusan actually, is it would be outside with a bamboo screen, and there'd be a U-shaped bamboo screen on the inside, and there would be a larger one on the outside, so the monk or nun could come in through the passageway, come in front, do their prostrations and bows, and then they would have the exchange. So there was visual privacy. Nobody could see them because of the bamboo screen, but everybody could hear what they're saying. Now, like all things American, we're a little obsessive about all this. So our Dokusan is considered sacred, holy, holy, and we have to do it absolute privacy, absolute confidentiality. And that's fine with me, but it's, from my perspective, unless you get into a legal issue and somebody's threatening to kill somebody or something, I don't see why it has to be privileged so much. More a demonstration of somebody's understanding and trying to correct that understanding through a dialogue. And it works both ways. I always learn more from doing Hasen than the people who participate in it with me, I'm sure. So with that, the person comes up, makes a bow, can kneel if you like, or remain standing. And you say, you don't have to say anything in particular. You just raise the question or the comment or the issue that you have that you would like clarification on. We're going for clarity. In jazz, they say straight ahead and strive for tone. We're straight ahead and striving for clarity here. So these are not clever, gotcha kind of intellectual exchanges. They're more trying to get down to gut level exposition of the Dharma, what it really means in real life. So I will respond. The person, and Shinjin also does this, will respond. And if the response is satisfactory, the person gets it and is accepting of it, and they bow and say, "Thank you for your teaching." This person says, "May you be well." So that's kind of the formal way it's done. And then at any point, usually as you get into the dialogues, anybody in the audience can say, "Unclear, unclear," or "Please explain, please say more," something like that. Unclear is usually the probably Chinese word that they use. And then this person has to try to say more, or may put it back on the other person, say, "Tell them your understanding of that," something like that. So it becomes a dialogue. And in the beginning, it's just a two-person dialogue. It becomes more interactive as we go. So typically we start with seniority. So Shinja and Mike Goldman would come up. We don't stress that here, but we can start that way if you like, Mike.
Let me think of what, so I'll pass for this one.
Okay. And I shall respond with the sermon of no words.
We'll do perfect.
Don't be shy. You don't need permission, just come forward.
I was watching a video, it's on YouTube, and the person speaking was a Dr. Bruce Lipton. And what they were talking about was the conscious and the subconscious. And he said that the subconscious forms 3 months before birth and goes through age 7.
Through age 7?
7. If they put probes on the child's brain, it resonates at theta. And theta, he said, was hypnosis. All right. But what he was saying was that during that 7 years that the child downloads from society, family members, life patterns. It's how he learns how to speak and act within society, how to live. But these patterns become somewhat hard coded in the mind. And we're either conscious or unconscious. And he was saying that probably 90 to 95% of the time that we're unconscious, and that the brain basically goes to the subconscious, those patterns that were created. And so when we drive and we start thinking about something, that it's the subconscious brain that drives for us. So in a sense, it does good
When
things.
we drive, like driving the vehicle.
Right. So it's kind of like, you get to drive and you start thinking about something, you get 5 miles down the road and you don't remember getting 5 miles down the road, but you made it okay.
Mhm.
And so I guess in a way, uh, what really kind of struck me was how unconscious I am. How often do I use, and I always thought that it's my understanding though that we have the ego, and I believe that the ego is which suffers because during that 7 years, we develop certain patterns, certain attachments. Those attachments can change, but the hard coding is pretty hard. He says the only way we can override that is through repetition to overcome it. But I guess the main question is that is the subconscious the ego, which suffers? And so only through our consciousness, being conscious of being fully aware and conscious, or, I'm trying to draw the parallel between consciousness and mindfulness, and also the parallel between the ego and the subconscious. Would you say they're the same or different?
I think ego has a special definition. My poor understanding of psychology of history is that Freud first developed the theory of the ego, the id, the libido, and so forth, to describe these different interfaces that we have with consciousness, with self and other. And so I've always maintained that, and there was an interesting exchange in history with Bodhidharma. My mind is like I'm unhappy. My mind. I can't settle my mind, and it told me this. Mom told me that when I look for it, I can't find it. There, I've settled your mind. So ego, I think, is a modern version of concept of self, and it has a specific kind of meaning in the Freudian um, model, as I understand it. Well, I don't think it's the same as the self in Zen. Consciousness is not ego. Consciousness transcends ego, my understanding. So the Sutra says, know this, know that, know eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, not seeing him. Until we come to no consciousness also. So this no consciousness is what Zen is pointing at. What does that mean?
Would the ego be the subconscious or the self be the subconscious mind?
I think the ego, we might say, is the reification of the self, which Buddhism challenges. Show me the self. Can't find it.
And the state that we would wish to be in would be one of mindfulness, so that we're fully aware,
Mindful of what?
mindful of everything that the aggregates are providing us.
Be mindful of the Buddha's teachings of emptiness, for instance, imperfection, and potentiality. When we are first born, just a secondhand theory, we go through a process of individuation after we come out of the womb. According to the 12-fold chain, it starts in the womb. Consciousness arises in the womb and so forth before you're even born. Most of the last, only the last three, I think, links in the womb or afterbirth, and then they lead to the next life cycle and the next birth and so forth. So in the womb, we're already developing consciousness, but you can see how it would be limited here. The same temperature as the mother's womb. Can't feel temperature. If you feel anything, you probably feel hunger, something like that, or if your mother's a drug addict, you might feel the addiction. But it's probably pretty vague at best. It's only when you're born that the process of individuation starts. In the beginning, we don't know that we're separate from anything. How could we know that? When we hit the cold air coming out of the mother's womb, it's going to be pretty shocking, traumatic. So in that sense, we're probably all suffering from PTSD. We can't remember it. We don't want to remember. It's too painful. And so, but the process of individuation precedes the process you're talking about, as I understand it. We learn to separate ourselves from the crib and from the room, from the environment, and from mom. In the beginning, we don't feel any separation. We begin to err on the side of duality, you could say. We begin to separate out from everything else. We begin to see our skin as where we end and everything else began. But it's actually where we join everything. So we're looking at it in a one-sided way. Individuation is beginning to reify the separate, independent, self-existent self, biological extension of soul, so forth. And the process you're talking about is socialization. When we start interfacing with others, once we are individuated and we see ourselves as separate and apart, then we have to negotiate the social realm.
That's where the attachments would come in.
That's where the attachments actually would have to come first, earlier, much earlier. As I said, in the womb, there would be, if you are hungry as a fetus, and the mother's body sends you the food through the umbilical cord, then you're satisfied. So that would be the inchoate beginning to craving. Right? You would begin. I don't want to feel hungry. I want to feel that way. I want to feel nourished.
So
Very natural.
duality.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, you begin to be sudden, but you begin to become aware of different states. Some are unsatisfactory, some are satisfactory. So discrimination starts to set in. There's a craving, which is again inchoate. It's not clear, but it's a craving just to not be hungry, or possibly a craving to be free of the drug, or the withdrawal from the drug. If your mother hadn't been addict, and by the time you're born, you're already conditioned in certain ways through the give and take of your existence. They're really not fully conscious of it. And as you individuate, you become conscious of the self as separate. So our process of sitting in Zazen is intentionally allowing personality to disintegrate. So it'll all fall apart again so it can all come back together again and rebuild on a more substantial, true basis of non-duality. That's pretty teaching. Anyone else on that before we move on? Online, anyone? Comment on that exchange? A question?
If anybody has a comment or a question, feel free to raise a physical hand or a digital hand, or put it in the chat box, whatever works for you.
One closing comment. The magic of Zazen, I think, is that the spin, that whole process, sort of stopped it dead in its track. So now you can begin untangling all of that. Or it will untangle. You can't really untangle it yourself. You can certainly recognize the problem. But if there's no more responses, I'll go home early. I'll give you a koan, perhaps for you to respond to. if in meditation we can come to no consciousness also, then where is that now? Don't be shy.
Oh, Joe, we have
Somebody-
a hand up from Joseph.
Okay, good.
Hey, Sensei.
Greeting, Joseph.
Greetings. What Goji said was very interesting. I'm tempted to try to do something about it, but there was something really interesting you said just about public private at the beginning that I thought was very interesting, and how we have a different concept today. Maybe we're not the same kind of guests and hosts that we used to be. But I guess if I had to try to pose a distinct individual question, maybe this is idle and intellectual, like you said, but um, one thing Zen maybe is about perfecting the human being. But another way it is, or maybe that we've talked about, is it's making a mistake on purpose. And again, this may be idle speculation or something, but like, I guess how can we differentiate Zen, stream of thought, way of approaching life from a certain confusion of public and private, which may be like the inappropriate action of somebody who's mad, or like the shifting roles that lovers take on, or like poetry.
You went mute.
Sorry, I guess I've been talking forever and I didn't realize I was completely muted. Thank you.
Time. Most of the time you were okay. Focus on the last 20 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. We're good. Just the last few words.
No, sure. I was trying to talk about public and private and trying to ask some question about that, about how we have like a different idea about what guest and host mean today. The Zen's about a certain kind of human perfection and seeking it, but it's also about learning to make a mistake on purpose and maybe learning to laugh at ourselves. And about, is Zen a certain way of like, is it any different in the way it approaches life, than I don't know. I guess I would want to ask a question about how to differentiate the sage from the lover or the madman or the poet. There is something about Zen that seems like it combines all of them. Anyway,
Well, to go back to the first expression, perfecting humanity, perfecting human nature. I think we have to recognize our limitations. That it is as perfect as it's going to get. It is what it is. And Buddha said it's imperfect. The whole world is imperfect from a human perspective. But think about what that means. You have a concept of perfection. And so that concept of perfection would color everything that you can recognize. As Dogen said, that which can be met with recognition is not realization itself, because realization is not reached by a deluded mind. So I think we have to give up the idea of our concept of perfection, and we hopefully will see it as it is perfect. It is as perfect as it can be, meaning in some sense it's imperfect. From a human perspective. But Buddha was a human, and he was teaching other humans. So this is a seeming dichotomy that we have to embrace.
no, it's very well said. I have more. I mean, if I had to respond directly to what Robert was saying, I guess I would say and maybe to your koan about consciousness, the Zen tries to tell us something about it's not just about your ego or even human psychology or even consciousness, that consciousness comes from, at some level, it responds to contact, to pain, to trauma. And so there's another way. And this is even the whole point. Like, yeah, anyway, that would be my thought.
Yeah. Yeah. The concept of ego, I'm sure, had all the best intentions. Like, I suspect, less the concept of hell. If you look at it, belief systems that threaten you with eternal damnation in hell, from a Buddhist perspective, it's already imperfect. It's already impermanent. It's already insubstantial. It's already enough suffering. Do you really want to layer on top of that the threat of hell? So that's like, from a Buddhist perspective, I think that's a curse. That's a curse that was placed on humankind. The concept of ego may be a similar curse.
Yeah, not to monopolize my time, but just, I guess, a final thought about hell on this beautiful Sunday morning. Augustine says that it's a joyful spectacle for precisely the elect who get into heaven. The spectacle of hell is a joyous tragedy from the perspective of those who get to observe it from on high, from their safe security. Anyway, just tiny final thought. Yeah.
The three bodies and the three minds in Buddhism point to this: the magnanimous mind, the nurturing mind, the joyous mind. And you have the Nirmanakaya, the transformation body, and you have the Dhammakaya, the essence of truth body, and you have the Sambhoga Kaya, or joy body. So all the three are sort of parallel. We're born into the Nirmanakaya, the transformation body. This is the body we are familiar with. It's the one that individuates. It's our incarnation. When we grow up, we become defensive of the self for good reasons. We have bullies at school pick on us and things like that. We begin to learn to defend ourselves, that we have to defend ourselves and our family and others in certain situations. So it's not unrealistic. We can't be a doormat. But it goes too far when it begins to embrace or reify this idea of the self as a permanent, self-existent entity that transmigrates from one life to the other, or goes to heaven, or goes to hell. Buddha said he found no evidence that there's any such thing as the Atman, as they called it in Hindu belief system. Atman. He taught anatta, no self. This is a difficult one for us to embrace. But at the same time, when we begin to apprehend the fact that there is no self to be defended, we begin to recognize the unrestricted, unlimited Dharmakaya, the truth body, the essence body, which is connected with everyone else and everything else. And as a synergistic result of that, we experience joy, Sambhogakaya. Or you could say it's not bliss. Don't doing our bliss here. You could say it's like a sigh of relief, as we often describe the breath. The Zazen breathing is like more like a sigh of relief. Finally, put that burden down. But you didn't make this up. You're not exactly responsible for it. Society imposes a lot of these beliefs on us as we grow up.
I was listening to a teacher and they were saying one's belief determines what one thinks. So our belief
Please.
determine what we think or what we think about something.
If you take the there's a theory about language, even that your language affects your belief or controls your thinking process. But if you take the khandhas, the model of the khandhas, you have form, appearance, the physical world, sensation, which is the energetic level of everything. And you have middle khandhas called perception, typically, but it also engages conception. So we see what we think we see, is what you're saying, or we experience a reality as we conceive of it. So in the beginning, there's probably not much conception going on when you're newborn, when you're a toddler and learning to walk and work with gravity, so forth, keep from falling down, testing your environment, learning how to negotiate it. Then comes a point at which your peers, your parents, your siblings, you're asking a lot of questions, the famous why, endless why question of a child. And people are answering that, so you begin to form concept of it. Just, I know what that is. I know what day it is. I know what night it is. I know what yesterday is. I know what tomorrow is, and so forth. So that's concept. And then concept begins to do a back formation of percept, so that you begin to go into situations with a preconception. This is going to be an argument. This is going to be a fight. This is going to be this. This is going to be that. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So concept is beginning to affect percept. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, worst case scenario of where these events were implanted with such ferocity in your neurological circuitry that they fire and come back, and they can overtake present reality, where you now think you're back in Vietnam and being dodging bullets. So this modern brain science, I think, is doing a lot to confirm sort of primitive mind science of 2,500 years ago. But again, our approach sits still enough, straight enough, long enough, all this will become clear. More clear. You're just itching now, I can see. I can feel you vibrating.
Your energetic body,
Yeah.
the energetic body, if it's a question.
I had sort of a mundane question about Zazen practice, the posture, and kind of the right effort that goes into Zazen. I've read and heard some teachers talking about the significance of the hara or the tanden, kind of the lower abdomen. And it seems like it's not clear to me in Zazen whether we should be focusing on the hara and trying to generate tension there, trying to tense our abdomen or have kind of stifled breathing as a result of that. Or if it's something that in the spirit of Shikantaza, we should just be kind of experimenting with, letting it come and go. In your experience, is there kind of a prescription in Zazen of what we should think or do with the hara as we're doing Zazen?
Yeah, if you look at the posture, cross legs, sitting on the floor, sitting on a cushion, it's a posture of surrender. We're basically giving up and letting it come to us. The principle in research is that you try to keep from corrupting the data. The sense data that's coming in, we think, is already corrupted. Buddhism says it's already corrupted. That's where stress begins, with the reception of the stimulus at the nerve ending. That's where stress begins. Then we amplify that by judging. It's good, this is bad, it's evil, this is simply right and wrong, right? And often our judgment is necessary and true. But when you're sitting in Zazen, most of these instructions that we read, that we say, well, how can I do that? I can't live that way. It's about when you're in Zazen, basically. So when you're sitting in Zazen, let all that go and stop trying to do anything. Stop trying to understand. Stop trying. Stop trying.
Mm.
The most counterintuitive, countercultural thing you can do.
Mm. It does seem like there's a paradox, however, with Zazen where there is a posture that is prescribed, and there are forms that are maybe more conducive to that posture of surrender.
It's similar to language. This sentence is not true. You can say that in English. What does it mean? Right. So Master Dogen said, the monk interrupts his teacher and says, "What are you thinking sitting there in that mountain still state?" The teacher says, "I am thinking, not thinking." And he says, "Not thinking, what kind of thinking is that?" He said, "It is not thinking." So usually we take that to mean, okay, I got to stop thinking. I have to somehow stop my mind from thinking. Dogen said, it's not that, it's non-thinking. Neither thinking nor not thinking. It's in the middle. Thinking comes and goes. That's the output of the brain. Secretions of the brain, as Roshi calls it. It's going to think whether you want to or not. Your body's going to breathe whether you want to or not. Nature's going to call whether you want to or not. Next time, say, "Leave me alone, I'm meditating." So we surrender to the body. We surrender to reality. We surrender to biology. We surrender to all of it. All my past harmful karma from beginning of greed, hate, delusion, those are the attitudinal parts of it. Born of body, mouth, and mind. It comes with this body, mouth, and mind. And when we can embrace that, we can see all I'm here doing is observing what's happening. I'm not, and you can say that's doing something, right? But you also have to say, as Dogen said, to carry yourself forward to the 10,000 or myriad things is delusion. That the myriad things and experience the 10,000 things is delusion. That the myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. So it's a 180-degree pivot. It's a backward step. Stop doing what you usually do. And stopping doing is a kind of doing, right? But you're mostly relinquishing your usual approach to everything, trying to surrender to, don't know, I don't know what I'm doing. If I knew what I'm doing, I wouldn't have to be doing it. It's absurd. It's absurd. But that's the non-dual side of it. May you be well. We schedule 4 of these each year. I'm beginning to rethink that. You can't tell if you've all heard everything I have to say already, so you don't want to hear it anymore, or if you're shy, or if you're afraid of showing your ignorance. Don't be afraid of showing your ignorance. I'm showing mine. Please.
We have a hand up online from
Okay.
Shishiki.
Val can come forward after that.
We take turns.
You're muted. Hey, Brian, you're muted.
There should be more of these if anybody wants more.
Perhaps we could go with Val and then Shishiki could come back in a minute.
Okay. we have these wonderful chocolate babkas, I think they're called, something like that, from the bars in New York. Famous bakery there. Diane's best friend from childhood, Jean Matusame, married Arthur Ashe. She made him the tennis star. And she lives in Connecticut, New York. I think she has an apartment in New York. So every year she sends us something special.
They're great.
This is Val.
Myojo.
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 And Dharma name means again?
Myojo as Morning Star.
Morning Star, yes.
So thank you for this. This is very interesting. Different kind of tokusan. I have a question, clarification regarding a sentence I read in your Unmind recently. I love reading those. I believe, speaking of perception and conception, my past ideas made me bristle at a sentence that it made me bristle. Let's say, oh my, I don't get this. And maybe I'm going to try to say it, but I think paraphrasing is excess in pursuit of moderation is no vice.
Extremism.
Extremism in pursuit of moderation is no vice. And I instantly said, I wanted to judge that and say, well, of course it's vice. Any kind of extremism is a vice, no? So I just let it be ambiguous and thought I'd request a dokusan in discussion, but
Thank you for bringing that up. That's partly my horny sense of humor at work, of course. Paraphrasing our Secretary of Defense. Paraphrasing Barry Goldwater, of course. Said something about extremism in pursuit of freedom is no vice or something like that. So extremism in pursuit of moderation, no vice. Also moderation and all things, including moderation. So this is the great, I'm not comparing myself to the ancestors, but they were masters at using language to defang language, to sort of help you see, like Dogen's expression, unthinking. Called unmind. Unmind is called unmind because my Dharma name, Taiun, means cloud, great cloud. But also means like the unkola, the opposite of whatever you're saying. Right? Is a wonderful prefix for things. You can say that's very unzen, whatever that means. So play on words, but extremism is usually a pejorative in the social sphere. You know,
that's what I see on.
and I don't know if you could say there are extreme attitudes in the natural sphere and the universal sphere. You know, but on the personal sphere, certainly think of where that remark is intended to land. You exerting extremism in the pursuit of moderation and sense of landing in the middle in your own practice, in your own life. You be the sacrifice, you be the crucifix, you're being extreme in a social setting. You're taking the punches. So extremism can manifest in many, many different ways like that are socially beneficial.
Okay.
Because you're doing it in the personal sphere, personal realm.
For the purpose of finding that middle path.
Yeah. Matsuoka Roshi often said the middle way is the most extreme position of all.
You're teaching.
In China, the debate was between extremes often. You notice Chinese liturgy that we have, poems are more about duality and non-duality than they are about Zazen technique and method. When it came to Dogen, Japan, and he shifted gear, he put all the focus on method rather than abstract conceptual thinking. Because the thesis is that we have to unlearn everything that we think we know, and we have to learn in a different mode. And the mode in which we learn is physical, physiological, it's direct. The senses are called up right away in the sutra. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. What does that mean? Well, you will find out what it means if you pay attention to eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Observe, simply observe, observe, observe. You'll begin to see what it means, that there is no eye, there is no ear, there is no tongue, no body, no mind. Which again, counterintuitive, countercultural. Of course, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So my debate is not about whether or not things exist or not, how they exist. And they exist by dint of emptiness. They exist by dint of impermanence. They exist by virtue of insubstantiality, virtue of perfection, and so forth. Well, this is a catch-22 on a cosmic scale that we're trying to pull off here. Okay. T, what you?
It gave me permission to demonstrate my ignorance, so I couldn't figure out how to get my phone off of mute and had to log in with my computer. So I figure I already did it, but no, I guess I was thinking about the question that you asked earlier, which is where are we when we're sort of just presence or consciousness without, and then you can kind of fill in the blank, right? Where does that go? And I was just thinking about a personal example, which is maybe demonstrates what happens or where that goes. We just came back from about 3 weeks out of town, and you come into a house up in the mountains and there's mouse droppings all over the place, especially in the silverware drawer and all the places where all the eating utensils are. And then the dishwasher's broken, right? Suddenly. And then there's all kinds of other things that have gone wrong in the last 3 weeks. And you notice that the expectations come up. So like kind of what you mentioned with perception, conception, preconception, or maybe expectation, and then all the emotions that come along with that, whether that's frustration or impatience or dissatisfactoriness or dukkha in general. And you just think, well, that's it, right? That's the self. That's the creation of all of the things that we've been talking about. What's there? Well, all that stuff is there, in addition to just what is actually there, right? So there's just something that's actually there, and there's consciousness, and then all of that other stuff is kind of extra, as opposed to just what needs to be done. And I don't know. I guess I was earlier on when you asked the question, wanted to answer it and see what you had to say about it, but then we moved on. So then I just demonstrated my ignorance by not being able to unmute my phone and now opening my mouth. So there we are.
Can you encapsulate that a little bit into a probe or a question or something I can respond to? That's a lot.
Well, no, I mean, I think that the question that you had is sort of what happens when we get up from the cushion, what's there when we're on the cushion, and then what is extra, or what's extra when we get off the cushion. And I guess that was all just a big explanation of myself selfing myself when I get up off the cushion, right? That's
Right.
what's there. And I think where Zazen is helpful is being able to recognize that all of that is extra. And I guess that maybe there's a question there, or maybe you can correct what I just said and we can move on.
Well, early in our conversations, I think when you were a resident here, it was many, many years ago, you brought up this question of discernment. What does discernment mean? And I think of discernment as kind of like a very fine slicing and dicing, right down to the micro level, if you will. So our intellectual mind can create all kinds of dichotomies where there are none. And one is this dichotomy between, okay, I get sitting still enough, straight enough, long enough on the cushion. I get the natural process of deconstructing, I don't know, sensory adaptation et cetera, et cetera. We can understand samadhi, shamatha, stilling, and vipassana insight in modern brain terminology and psychological terminology. So what Zen is asking us to do, I think, is find the final discernment. That is, in design, we call it recognizing the problem and then defining the problem. If you define the problem thoroughly, completely, and accurately, then the solution to the problem is inherent in the definition. So many of us have the same dilemma, and it comes up again and again. Okay, what happens when I get off the cushion? Well, you're not doing anything on the cushion. And so you're not doing anything when you get off the cushion. Everything is happening, everything is doing, but you don't have to be the doer. What we can learn on the cushion is what is actually happening when we're off the cushion. If you draw a line there, you're the only one drawing that line. It's a dotted line at best. There's really no separation between the two. So I think it's best if we think of our zazen as kind of like an instrument. And you could say, not a musical instrument, but a microscope, telescope, so forth, that kind of technical instrument that expands our senses, helps us see into the scales of reality that we ordinarily cannot perceive. And so when we sit in zazen, we're simply pulling out the instrument and turning it on. And we're taking a closer look, a deeper listen, a deeper feel of reality, less biased, less preconceived. And so that exercise of taking a break, going on a mini vacation for half an hour to an hour on the cushion, that begins to refresh our reality. And we begin to see or things that we ordinarily don't see. Buddha said the mind imposes a false stillness on reality. So by virtue of opposites, we have to sit still for that stillness to fade away. The false stillness. We have to engage in relative stillness for that stillness to be mitigated. And when we do, that kind of, hard to call it understanding. I don't think Buddha didn't understand this. It's not in the realm of understanding. That kind of comprehension, if you will, goes with us when we leave the cushion. But if we look for it, then we hide it from ourselves. So it's a real catch-22. Very difficult. But that's where true discernment lies.
Thank you.
May you be well. And back for seconds.
I'll try not to monopolize my time or your time or everybody else's time because I could kind of do this all day.
Not a bad thing to do.
I think I was at first attracted to Zen because of the skepticism that's built into it as a philosophy. I think Zen and Buddhism more broadly are very much about experiencing and experimenting, and finding things to be true in your own direct experience. I think I'm a very skeptical and critical person by nature, and so that appealed to me. And yet, I think I have this sort of, you may call it insidious doubt that kind of arises because of that.
Mhm.
So I've been reading recently about the history of Buddhism and how it started in northern India and has since declined there virtually down to nothing. It went to China, where it prospered for many centuries and has declined basically down to nothing. It jumped to Japan, and the lineage that we are a part of comes from there. And I'm wrestling with this paradox of what I believe to be true is that Buddhism and Zen are pointing at capital T truth, the Dharma, like the real nature of reality and how we can understand it in a direct sense. And that kind of sounds like the greatest thing ever. So if it were so true, and if everybody could experience this for themselves, why is it such a rare thing to be on this path?
Mhm.
And why have societies that have proliferated this teaching and invested in it kind of thrown it by the wayside? Why does it seem like such a rare thing? And for it to have been around for this long and to be so infrequently practiced and so sparse in the world seems like it's confusing to me.
Very good. I'm going to Shinjin to respond to that one too. You know, just trying to say we don't have a God to blame. We can't say, well, it's God's will. You know, there's no time. It's not the end times yet. You know, we have to wait. We don't have any of that as a cop out. So we have to say human nature is not Buddha nature. Buddha nature transcends human nature. Human nature is like cow nature, dog nature, cat, chicken, dog, cat, cow. It's incarnated. We are born of this body, mouth, and mind. Along with it comes all the social levels of the three poisons, the speech, action, livelihood, the you know, right conduct, and all of that, the Eightfold Path, and the poisons of delusion and greed, anger, hatred. So we don't answer the why questions in Buddhism. Our question is, those are philosophical, religious, belief-based answers. If the answer to the why question is the who, it's theism. If we don't dwell on the how questions, how things other than how to sit, how to develop the technique, how to establish events, and the practical level. The question is then is what? What is it really? What is this really? And not to try to explain why it is, how it got to be the way it is, astrophysics and all of that, right? Big Bang and everything else.
Yeah.
So those are, in the second book, it's rationalism on one end, theism and religion on the other. Then it's right down the middle with the what question. When Huineng met his eventual successor, he asked him, where from? And he said, mountain he'd been studying on, practicing on. He said, what is it that comes? So the monk was unable to answer. He couldn't relate to that. Couldn't answer what is it that comes here to visit Rujing. I know. Huineng. So 8 years later, the same monk comes back in the abbot's quarters and says, to try to name it would be to miss the mark, something like that. And Huineng responds instantly and says, is it dependent on a practice enlightenment? And this monk says, it's not that there is not practice enlightenment, it's that they cannot be defiled, brought down to ordinary understanding or common understanding. So the first thing you said when you came up this time is how to understand this directly. We have to give up understanding.
That's for your teaching.
Not on every level. On a social level, we have to understand in order to take right action. So then just organizing and running a place like the Zen Center, we have to have that kind of understanding. But when it comes to what this is about, there's no understanding.
Thank you for your teaching.
There you go. We've got about 10 minutes left. Anyone online? Joseph's hand is up again, or is it from before?
No, it's potentially a new thought. Don't let me overtake, but I just, and I guess I want to be sensitive to what you're saying about not intellectualizing. I just want to point out that's a tantalizing question you're posing about why did Bodhidharma come to bring this light? Like why does Buddhism seem to correspond to these very narrow moments in history? And I would offer an interpretation. It's probably poetry and hopefully not too direct here, but I mean, just it strikes me that like the immense joy that can seem like bitterness, it can seem like nihilism, that corresponds with Buddha's, enlightenment, his vision of extinction of our desire. It corresponds with these narrow bands of like golden ages in history because they have this almost mythical innocence that corresponds to that affective state, like that emotional state. Like you would have to be on the verge of naive to believe in an age before war, you know what I mean? But golden ages and renaissances did exist, but they're brief. They're like they destroy themselves. Like, but that's necessary too. And it's, I don't know, there's something about the art of transformation here, maybe, and regeneration. Like the extinguishing lesson of Buddha, it seems to me, is that to be is to grow, right? This is one of the etymological things that comes all the way from India, right? Like the Sanskrit root of the word existence is connected to the one that's about growth and change and transformation. Anyway, that's a tiny thought, but yeah.
Oh, it's getting back to Niles' question of why does it come and go? And we do have to exercise discrimination, but I think my model of the four spheres, personal, social, natural, universal, can give you a kind of a handle on this. Where most of our discriminating activity has to come into play is in the social realm. That's where we interface with family, friends, politics, the whole catastrophe. Then in the natural realm, we also have to do analysis. Shinjin Mike Goldman is very educated in terms of, is it etymology, herpetology?
Entomology.
Entomology and herpetology, right?
Yeah.
Serpents and so on. So he knows an awful lot about the natural world. Otherwise, he probably would have been killed by a poisonous snake, a venomous snake by now. So we have to, right? When it comes to the universal, I don't know, how much we can do in that realm. And you see with all the new space probes and everything we're doing, we can do quite a bit, but we're not affecting that realm very much. It's affecting us more and more greatly by sending back the images and doing the analysis and so forth that physics does on astrophysics. So when it comes to the cycle of Buddhism, it's often said we're in the declining age of Buddhism. No matter what age in history, the teachers were saying we're in the declining age of Buddhism. Right? So you could say it's always declining, but like a garden dying, all the vegetables and plants in the garden die, they become compost or mulch for the next year's garden. Buddhism is always rising again. So it's this constant wave of coming and going, coming and going. And of course, the reason why Buddha could not fill a football stadium of 50,000 people is that people are ignorant. People are ignorant of what is important. What's the most important thing, which was my last two Unmind Dharma bites, or Unmind and Dharma bite postings were about that. What is the most important thing? What is the least important thing? So there's a cycle to everything. They say everything has a shelf life, and in business circles, they say it's going to do a kind of a crescendo form. It's going to build and build and build and build, and the innovators and inventors sort of ride the wave to the top, and then they jump off. And then other people come in and take over the business and sort of ride it down. It's inevitable cycle of decline. In early Buddhism, I think the four kalpas are seen that way. There's the kalpa of creation, and there's a kalpa of destruction, and there's kalpa or continuation, then a kalpa of destruction, and then the empty kalpa. And then again comes about a kalpa of creation eventually. So we witness these cycles again and again in our life. And as I say, we want to differentiate between the personal sphere and the social sphere and understand where the teachings apply and how they apply. So the teachings of these extreme kind of teachings apply in the personal realm. That's where we want to take the responsibility for our existence, even though it's very difficult to embrace the idea that I intended for all this to happen. Next time you're sitting on the toilet, just take a look and say, whose idea was this? Is this the way I would design things? No. If I had my druthers, we'd live on air. Reproduction, we just separate into two, nice and clean, like an amoeba. But that's not the way it is.
It's not the way it is. Thank you, Sensei.
Sensei, separating into two doesn't sound nearly as exciting as the way we procreate among humans today.
But it's simple. So with that, let's close out. We'll do the four great vows as usual. Thank you for your patience and listening here. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Put away it's unsurpassable, I vow to realize. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are indestructible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Means are numberless, I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize. Please join us for New Year's Eve. We have traditional udon noodle dinner at 9. We start sitting at 7:30. And then we come back and start sitting at 10 again. And starting about 10:10, we start striking the gong and chanting Master Dogen's 108, or reciting Master Dogen's 108 Dharma gates of illumination. So the last one is struck on midnight. Please join us for that if you have time.
Oh, Joe, may I give a quick plug for our guest speaker?
Sure.
We are starting the new year with a bang. Please mark your calendar. January 5th, this coming Sunday, we've got Susan Moon as our guest speaker. Susan is a very well-known writer and Zen teacher on the West Coast. She's in the Soto lineage of Suzuki Roshi, and she has focused her writing on the aging process and on Zen. She currently practices at the Berkeley Zen Center and the Everyday Zen Sangha. She's going to be a very interesting speaker, so please invite your friends and associates to join you here next Sunday.
Thank you.
What I was going to say is the reason that Buddhism fell away in India is the Gupta.
John, you're the host, so we're going to close here.
So you transfer the host to him. That's how you.
Yep. Oh, Joe, we've got a quick note in the chat box. Zena's asking, will the New Year's Zazen be available online?
I think we have a Zoom room for it. So I'm assuming we do. I think Larry Little is helping backstop Robert and Joji and that. And I think he told me that we do have a Zoom room for it. So please plan to join, at least at the 10 o'clock hour Eastern time.
Depending on.
Can I add a comment about Susan Moon?
We have a comment here about Susan Moon.
And it really ties.
Pick up.
Hey, John, just wanted
Yes.
to thank you for having Susan Moon
See,
coming. Just a note, anyone who might not know her work, she just had a lovely article on time and Zen and times in the Lion's Roar magazine, this most recent one. So
this event.
I'm thrilled that you're going to have her here. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. I'll make it a point to look at my recent copy of Lion's Roar. And for the rest of you online, we often linger for a few minutes just for a more informal chat discussion about whatever comes up. So please feel free to linger and let's talk for a few minutes. Good morning, Zena.
Hi, John. How are
It's,
you?
it's nice to see your smiling face this morning.
You too. Thank you, John. And I just cannot express enough like how you manage the online, the Sangha for the Sundays. I really do appreciate it. So thank you for your warmth.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I certainly resonate when they talk about Zen being one mistake at a time. I
Yeah.
uh, I show up and make my share every Sunday.
Right. Right. Absolutely. But
Joseph, go ahead.
jump off, but yeah. Greetings, everyone, and see y'all later. Happy New Year.
Okay. Bye-bye. Joseph, thank you for your generous contributions this morning. And Corolla, Sunday would not be complete without hearing just a few words from you before we close out.
Okay. I have been thinking and sitting with this comment I read in Tricycle a couple of weeks ago, that we are deluded about the nature of craving because we think that we crave specific things. And actually, the aim of craving is to end the sensation of craving. And I found that very interesting because one of the things that separates us from what we would call quote unquote innocent animals is craving rather than just hunger and need. And so it's very hard in our lives to distinguish between what is a craving, if I don't have this, I'm just going to die and I'm miserable, between I need a new pair of socks. And this is something that I've just been thinking about, that we really need to understand what it is, what hole we're trying to fill in ourselves when we crave things.
It's a very beautiful insight, Corolla. I'm not sure I've got any special response to it, but it is extremely striking. Yeah, no, that's a great. I'm glad you surfaced that. I mean, I guess just to try to cram it into a formal structure. I mean, it seems to me like human desire is about something that goes beyond us as individuals, right? And, in other words, it's not necessarily about a what, or at some level even a who, because it crosses generations, it crosses time. I don't know. There is something about like that bidirectional structure of human communication where it has to be transmitted and like gathered and stored and archived and collected. And we think this differentiates us from animals, but they have all the same signal sign systems we do. Like, ants have an incredibly complex like coordination and signaling mechanism, incredibly refined and very brutal hierarchies, that are so in their innocence more fascistic than we could contemplate. So I don't know, there's something about, I guess you're making me think about the character of human beings, not just culturally, like the anthropology, like our the structure of the gift and sacrifice, like these impossible actions that somehow transcend the actual material that they're made of, or suspend us between life and death. At any rate, take us beyond the animal, but precisely through rituals that involve becoming animals. Anyway, sorry, that's too many paradoxes, but it's a great thought. Yeah.
Well,
Corolla,
when you
what I
read
heard,
things,
go ahead.
go
Pardon?
ahead, John.
What I heard you say, and I'll say it back to you in very simplistic terms. Am I choosing to take this drug for the sensations of joy and ecstasy and euphoria? Or am I choosing to take this drug to stop the withdrawal symptoms that are negative sensations?
And I think that along the way that the goal evolves. That initially, I mean, why would people start taking drugs in the first place? It's because it makes them happy or takes away their pain, whatever that pain is, physical or mental or emotional, or the pain of boredom or whatever. And then over time, that evolves into I want this drug. If I take this drug, I'll stop wanting this drug. And so the prevention of the suffering of craving becomes the goal. Because you
So-
don't really see that many happy junkies.
So what you're saying is what starts off as maybe a fresh, enjoyable experience slowly devolves with repetition into something no longer fresh and enjoyable, but more a cycle of suffering and trying to end the suffering.
Well, I think we see this some with addiction, with you look at gambling. People lose everything a lot of times gambling, but they can't stop because it becomes a compulsion. And so, when you go back to like the selfish gene idea that we're all part of that cycle of I want. The wolf at the carcass doesn't step back and say, "Thank you, I've had enough, you go now." That we compete for food, space, all of these things, and that is just built into us. And one of the reasons they say we've succeeded as a species is because we succeeded in taming that somewhat and became cooperative. And that so a certain amount of selflessness is necessary for our survival. And I think over time, some of the more selfish manifestations kind of got called out.
And yet still there's enough of that tribal bonding that generates animosity toward the tribes that are not like us, that still seems to constantly, year after year, decade after decade, fuel all of these atrocities and these killings and these, one group against another. Corolla, you would think at some point we could evolve out of that, wouldn't you think?
Well, to say thank you, I've had enough is in some ways to be seen as a sign of weakness. There was that wonderful question about why isn't there more Buddhism? Because it's work and it's risky.
Where's the risk?
In being a non-combatant, in not being self-aggrandizing, not doing everything to get ahead. I mean,
Yeah, no, she's absolutely right, John. Like there's a reason the records of the very first empires didn't survive, you know, like there's a reason the world looks like this, where everyone is slavish and advertising their own, you know, their own qualities, right? Like we have to communicate and express and articulate ourselves. I don't know, maybe I'm saying something different at this point than Corolla was saying, but
No, I think you're saying exactly. I mean, where is Hojo in life and where is Elon Musk?
And how would you evaluate Hojo's life of, and you know, none of us know really the internal mechanisms and feelings and thoughts of a Hojo or an Elon Musk. But Elon Musk, if anything, it looks like there's a drivenness there that I'll go back to your drug language, a drivenness there that has all kinds of cycles of up and down and physical exhaustion and euphoric wins and dramatic losses. If we put, as you mentioned a moment ago, we put Hojo alongside of Elon Musk. He certainly hasn't had those kinds of extremes running through his system, his physical body. And frankly, Hojo, I think, is maybe 84, 85. My first thought is, I wonder how old Elon Musk I wonder if Musk will reach that far into old age. No one knows. He may be the first one to be he may be one of those who becomes a centenarian, or he may die of a heart attack in his early 50s. I don't know.
The point I'm making is that in the view of society, in view of survival, he's got the money, he's got the house, he's got the cars. And to me, he's a hungry ghost.
Yes. Well said.
Great big stomach, little tiny mouth, never satisfied, always suffering and spreading suffering, you know, like flower petals at a wedding. So to me, there's, you know, there's a large difference there. But in the view of our society, who do people look up to? Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
And
You're
if he suddenly converted to Buddhism and said, oh, you know, I'm going to endow temples all over and feed the poor and vaccinate the sick, what would the public reaction be?
Well, we've had some of those most recent and in the past. And when I say this, you know, it's certainly something that could be questioned. But Bill Gates stepped aside from being active on a day-to-day basis in the company that made him a billionaire, so that he and his wife could focus on what I'd call humanitarian things. When Warren Buffett was asked about that, he said, I like what I do every day, you know, investing in companies and so forth. I see that Bill Gates enjoys the humanitarian giving the money away. So I've arranged to give him a large share of my wealth because he seems to enjoy that part of the cycle, so to speak. Andrew Carnegie, as you know, once he reached a certain age, he started distributing his wealth all over the country in the form of libraries.
Well, philanthropy, if you'll excuse me interrupting you,
No,
is
go
kind
ahead.
of the expected thing to some extent among the wealthy, or it has been up till now. Now,
and yet wouldn't Zen say it's it's pretty empty of merit. Like even building all those Zen temples, John, Bodhidharma would say it's not. That's
No
the
merit.
yeah, the merit of Zen goes beyond anything material, any possible. I mean, Musk embodies the exuberance of a golden age. It's his existence that enables Hojos. Like Buddhism can only exist, I would say, in this fragile bubble of optimism and exuberance because it represents the antithesis, the antipode that is, the bitter certainty of desire's extinction. You know what I mean? Like there's a balance. It's fragile. Anyway, yeah.
I'm a little confused here. I was thinking that the reason householders and businessmen line up every morning when the monks walk through the villages, I've seen that in Thailand, is that they feel like they're gaining merit by putting food in the monks' bowls. Am
I
I
mean,
missing?
that's spiritual food at that point. I would say that's a sacrifice and a profound transformation of that act. Like I would say food for monks is anything that lifts their spirit above the material world. But I mean, how monks eat. It's hyper conscious. Every bite is chewed really carefully. They really think through how does this food go through, what energies run through this particular material configuration of molecules in this bite of food. What energies and forces animate and move beyond it? What winds blew in the fields? What farmers sweat when in, you know what I'm saying? Like they try to spiritualize the food, whatever. Don't let me be an anthropologist right now. Let me and don't let me interrupt you. Yeah.
Well, please, but Corolla, Joseph, help me understand. My understanding is that even in Buddha's time, all the way up to the present time, there were businessmen who stepped forward and provided for the needs of the Sangha when they were retreating in the rainy season, and all the way up, to today, when there are people similar to what I once was, a householder with a business that are setting aside money to support Buddhism in one way or another.
Sure.
Uh,
Let me let you pose a question. Don't let me interrupt. I'm not trying to say that's not noble at all, but just pointing out, and it's like it's even necessary for the propagation of Zen and it's necessary to the structure of religion that it includes demands for material sacrifices that will enable the clergy to function. But it's not like what Zen is goes beyond any material thing. And so that's why it has no merit. I don't know, just trying to spell out. I mean, but what Bodhidharma says to the emperor is a puzzle. Like it should make you wonder. So I'm not trying to reduce it, but yeah.
right.
Well,
Okay.
I
Corolla?
take issue with what you were saying about you need some good times in order to have Zen. Suffering, there's always suffering. Good times are bad, people suffer. And a lot of it is during good times, people suffer because cravings proliferate. And bad times, people suffer because there's genuine want. And we have that whole spectrum going on all the time. That
Sure.
Zen
I was only saying like
is a way to deal with suffering,
yes.
and as such is always going to have some resonance with some people.
For
With some
sure.
people,
Joseph,
it's
say that, Joseph,
Yes.
say that again. You need good times.
Well,
I want to be very
it was
clear.
more a very rudimentary kind of historical interpretation, saying that Buddhism, when it's effective, is responding to a highly stratified society, trying to help people from a highly successful culture that includes like in order for cultural height to exist for masters and lords, and there has to be a broad base of 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 a lower class of slaves of an undercaste. And it seems to me Buddhism works to try to liberate people from that mindset that enabled the cultural height and the glory, the flowering of a golden age. but that was one that was built on massive suffering. And we look back with such golden eyes and say, oh, what a golden age of innocence it was. But if you saw how much slavery and brutality was involved in constructing it, like, I guess, thinking about Elon Musk, right? He is like this artist, this entrepreneur. He's an architect of a new modernism. You know what I mean? And he's done so much material improvement to the baseline human capabilities, just in terms of being able to communicate, with satellites. And, it's an amazing set of things that he's provided to us at a material level. And yet he's empty, and his emptiness, is coordinate to Hojo's fullness, despite his poverty. And it's interesting to me, they share a tempest. They're older men. They've been through divorce and so on. You know what I mean? But like, nevertheless, Hojo has found so much more serenity and beatitude and convalescence from the whirlwind of modernity. Elon Musk could pray for 30 years and still not be where Hojo is, but
Well, I'm just going to suggest that we really never know, in the same way that I don't really know, Joseph, what your interior life, your day-to-day experiences, feelings, thoughts, and you as well, Corolla. We don't ever really know. Uh, in the gated communities, those teenagers, they deal with their own trauma. Those children deal with their own trauma. The highly successful doctors and lawyers deal with their own drug dependencies and drug addictions. And so I just try to know that behind the golden gates in the multi-million dollar mansions that we often pass by and look at with a little bit of admiration, respect, awe, or the architectural beauty, you just don't ever know what the level of misery is there versus some of the people in these what I call workforce neighborhoods that get up every morning, get their 3 kids ready for school, go to the factory, make their $500 a week, come home, have dinner, and are just amazing parents and live out a life working in the local factory. I'll stop, but I think you get that. I don't see a lot of correlation between riches and prosperity and high incomes.
no, sure, John. And I mean, I think your perspective on it's incredibly insightful. And I'll just remark briefly, from a diagnostic point of view, it does seem to me success under the material conditions that, we enjoy involves anxiety disorders, involves people like really intensely attuned to the rhythms of a frantic, reality, a frantic society that seems mutable, that's outpacing them, whatever. Maybe I'm projecting all this, of course, but just to say, I mean, Carol is right. Like, Buddhism's eternal, suffering's eternal, all these lessons are eternal. The rudimentary dialectic I'm trying to evoke is fundamentally wrong at some level, but there is also some truth to, like, Buddhism is balanced by a glorious golden high social height and elevation. And it's precisely the pathos of that distance and it's our liberation from it that marks its, on the verge of innocent kind of exuberance, at the same time as it tries to nihilistically extinguish all our desires that seem so illusory that something like material power wants to hypnotize us. Anyway, don't let me descend into poetry, but yeah.
My bottom line is the Buddhist business, the business of Zen Buddhism, will always have unlimited potential and possibility for working with human beings. And suffering doesn't seem to be on its way out anytime soon.
And all suffering is suffering. We have no business judging the suffering of others. Say, oh, you're suffering because you're craving something I find silly.
Yeah,
And there is a sort of tendency to do that, to have a hierarchy of what we feel other people should want.
you're right, Corolla. The language I hear out on the street lately is we've got to be willing to meet each other where we're at and where they are at. Ideally, hopefully, without a lot of judgment. Hey, this has been interesting.
Yep.
Thank
On
you
that
for
note, I
lingering.
will say goodbye.
Thanks for your
Goodbye,
patience.
Corolla. Goodbye,
Nice to see you.
Joseph. See you next Sunday.